Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. I'm your host, Brooke Mitchell, and today's webinar is Journey Through China's Giant Panda Habitats, presented by NatHab Expedition Leader Eddy Savage. Thank you so much for being here today, Eddy. Over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Brooke, and hello, everybody. It's very nice to be here again to talk about our extraordinary expedition over to China into the wilds of Sichuan province, China. Um, yeah, folks, I've been doing this expedition now since 2017, and it's one of my favorite places to go and look for endangered wildlife and very rare animals that we don't otherwise have the opportunity to see anywhere else in the world because a lot of them are endemic to China. And with that being said, um, this presentation, I'll just click ahead here. This presentation here is it's going to cover quite a lot, I hope in an hour, but I want to give you a good insight into basically what we're doing over there. So I'll give you a heads up. We're going to talk about the current state of giant pandas, their population and captivity, etc. What is a giant panda base and why are they so important for us to visit? What is a giant panda nature reserve and how does that differentiate from the bases that we're going to? The Giant Panda National Park. As of 2019, we've got a new Giant Panda National Park. I'll give you a bit of an understanding of what that's like, and then an expedition summary. So kind of throughout this, you'll be piecing together some, not all of the expedition, as there's so much. It's basically layers and layers and layers and layers of experience on the China trip. But it's going to give us a good idea of what is going on this expedition. So, folks, let's kick it off by starting with some numbers. So here's our giant panda in captivity, extremely recognizable globally by its black fur, its black eye patches, black ears, white face, and a pattern that you can recognize anywhere in the world. Well, if we go back almost 50 years now, around 50 years ago, uh, there was quite a bit of research going on in China. This is around the time that China had opened its doors more familiarly to international organizations, to other countries. Governments began talking, and research began happening in giant panda habitat. Of course, prior to 1977, there was quite a lot known, or there was already kind of a worldwide phenomenon going around when people thought about giant pandas and their unique coloration and our kind of pandemonium, our global obsession with this particular bear. But some of the initial research that happened in the 1970s, there's came up with a population estimate of 2,459 giant pandas. This was a count that took, this is wild pandas, by the way. This is a count that took approximately 4 years to complete, scouring existing habitat and interviewing people living in the countryside in these remote regions as, who's seen pandas, where is their understory bamboo, all this kind of stuff. Doing, physical sightings, collecting evidence, and all that kind of stuff in the way of scat and prints and all kinds of stuff like that. The number that the Chinese government published was 2,459 giant pandas left in the wild. Now, with that, around the same or the following years, there was another giant panda survey. So since the 1970s, there's been 4 national giant panda surveys for population, and there's another one that's underway right now to get more of an updated number, as the last one was published in 2015. But what happened next was in 1988, there was another survey published where it was estimated that there was only 1,114 giant pandas left in the wild. Now, when we're talking about how we count pandas and kind of the scrutiny that the those kind of lead researchers are going on, there was definitely some advancements in counting techniques and advancements in truly understanding how many pandas are in a certain area. As well, from the 1970s till the 1980s, there was significant habitat loss. It was somewhere in that range that there was an international or there's a national ban on logging, as deforestation was a huge issue when it comes to losing giant pandas. But in the 80s, when we're seeing that there's almost 1,000 left in the wild, and some estimates even brought that number lower than 1,000, somewhere between 900 and 1,100 giant pandas left in the wild. You can imagine that global conservation groups and China as well was extremely concerned basically with those numbers and wanted to see more protection. So from the 1970s into the 1980s, there was basically extreme conservation initiatives. Certain giant panda nature reserves were set up where people were basically paid to move out of these wild areas. Logging was stopped, and kind of more modern methods of protecting landscapes with ranger patrols and severe or basically prison sentences and that kind of thing for anything to do with taking from giant panda habitat and removal, whether it's logging or poaching or that kind of thing. So there's a lot of really important and key conservation moves that happened in the 1980s as far as protecting giant pandas. As well, from the 70s to the 80s, we're starting to see giant panda bases start to crop up, where in a few key locations in China, they've got some wild caught pandas, whether they were rescued from the wild due to a bamboo flowering event or landslides after an earthquake or something like that, or injured or starving. They basically were rescued from the wild and brought to these panda bases where they were then cared for, studied, and began what is now the modern giant panda breeding program. And we'll touch on that. 2004, 16 years on, again, more technological advancements with the research techniques for counting, as well as citing kind of more of a significant protection framework for the pandas. The population was seen to increase again by about 500 animals, which is pretty great to see in 600 years. Now, how much of that comes down to more accurate counting methods, and how much of that comes down to pandas reproducing at the incredibly slow rate that they do and growing by about 1/4 or or maybe even 1/3 of their population. It's hard to say, but that was more of an accurate presentation of the population of pandas in 2004. And then most recently, in 2015, this is the last number that we have, and this is the number that is cited to date, which is there are 1,864 giant pandas left in the wild. Now, this number is cause for all kinds of discussion in the giant panda research community and that kind of stuff as to how we exactly got there. But what it ultimately ended up leading to was giant pandas were removed from the endangered species list and pulled into the vulnerable category. Now, this is not just because of the numbers in the wild. This status was also because of the millions and if not billions of dollars from the course, basically that were spent on giant panda conservation and habitat protection, and these giant panda breeding and research bases that I'm going to talk about in a minute. It was lifted from endangered to vulnerable because basically the international community felt that there were so many resources focused on these bears that, as well as a very successful breeding program, which we'll talk about in a minute, that these pandas were unlikely to go extinct because of the protections afforded to them. So that's really, and the funding afforded to them. So that's really, really quite incredible. So IUCN Red List of endangered species brought it up from endangered to vulnerable, which is great. Now, I'm very curious to see what the fifth giant panda survey comes up with, but typically they're released every 10 to 15 years, and there was some discussion saying that 2020 COVID and everything delayed a lot of that. So we may still be a year or two out from the next survey. Very cool. Now, let's look at all of the giant panda habitat left on the planet. This is a map Inside the square is a portion of China um, where the giant pandas live. And if we get a little bit closer, this is what it looks like. So this is from the IUCN website. They've plotted it out as best they can, and you can see that where the orange is that is kind of confirmed giant panda habitat, and then where there is kind of the grayish color is where it's possibly where giant pandas are, but they have not been seen. Now I am just going to grab my laser pointer here. Hopefully this shows up. But I just want to point out this habitat here. I'm circling it with my laser pointer. So this is the Qinling Mountains. It's up in Shanxi province, and you can see Xi'an, where the Terracotta Army is up here. This isn't an area that we explore on our trip, but I just want to acknowledge that this is an isolated population of giant pandas, and the giant pandas that live here, they're technically a subspecies. The Qinling giant panda, slightly larger heads, as well as some of the bears come out having brown fur, brown eye patches, brown ear patches, brown shoulder straps, brown hip straps, instead of the black. But that's the Qinling giant panda habitat over there in the Qinling Mountains. So around 200 or so giant pandas are thought to live in that area. Now, the rest of the giant pandas are over here, and this is we're looking at in a sense a very small portion of China, and we're looking at a very small portion of the world, and this is where all existing giant panda habitat is. There is no more. There are no more giant pandas in the wild anywhere except for this location, and sometimes that's hard to envision or hard to understand. But these particular mountains, when we look at, let's actually start with Chengdu. When we look at Chengdu, Chengdu is kind of down in this low floodplain basin. To the west, I'm going to grab my laser pointer again for this. To the west over here, we have the foothills to the Himalayas, just basically mountains and valleys and mountains and valleys and mountains and valleys, and they keep creeping up higher and higher and higher in altitude the further you go, eventually reaching the Tibetan Plateau. But this particular area here, where there is giant panda habitat, is right on the edge of the mountains, and it's basically valley bottoms that are sitting at 1,000 about 3,000 feet above sea level, and some of the mountain tops in these regions, in particular around here, which is kind of the Four Sisters Mountain region, can reach 20,000 feet regularly over 18,000 feet high, these mountains. And it's that difference in elevation that makes a big difference, or it's very important, because you've got everything from your kind of subtropical habitat down in the Chengdu or Sichuan Basin here, all the way up to alpine, subalpine, and everything in between, including temperate rainforests, cloud forests, you know, there's not really deserts or anything like that, but it's basically a mixed broadleaf forests. It's got everything in between. But the main habitat that ends up showing up there in kind of these very rainy, wet, kind of not quite subalpine environments is the bamboo understory. And so all of this habitat has bamboo understory, which is food for those giant pandas. It's a pretty extraordinary spot here. Now, with that in mind, I'm going to click through. I'm going to just turn my laser pointer off here. I'm going to click through, and each of the giant panda symbols is where on this expedition we end up going. And so our route really travels along here, and this is where we end up spending time. But our route in which we drive really covers a huge proportion of the giant panda habitat that's left on this planet. And so whether or not we're walking through it, which would take a very long time, as we travel and we make our stops, we have some lunch, we look at the mountaintops, and we're looking out the windows of the bus, we are seeing a huge majority of the giant panda habitat that's left on the planet during this expedition. So I'll just touch on this 67 giant panda nature reserves. 66% of giant pandas live in the reserve, so there's still lots of area that's not protected, and yeah, about 50% of their potential habitat is protected. So that is something that that China has actively been working on, and we'll get to more details about that. But on our trip, we go to three different panda bases: the Duzhengyan Panda Base, the Duzhengyan Panda Valley, Wolong Shenshuping Panda Base, and then we spend time within three giant panda nature reserves and drive through much more than that. Uh, and are adjacent to or just in some of the natures, like just outside of some of the nature reserves as well. So diving in a little bit deeper, let's talk about the Giant Panda National Park. And we all remember the screen prior where we've got kind of the existing giant panda habitat. Here's another another example of that. And when you look at the kind of pinkish line and what it encompasses is basically the Giant Panda National Park is placed on placed over top of existing giant panda habitat. Um, and what they're trying to do is basically create um, a single management framework where they can really work like kind of inter county, because there's, you know, within the province of Sichuan, there's going to be kind of county level management of each of the different nature reserves. And you could be, you know, 5 miles away from 5 miles to the left, and they're doing one thing one way over here, and then 5 miles to the right, they're doing it completely differently over here. And so by kind of having the national coverage for all of these nature reserves, it's basically going to make a lot of the um, research and connectivity, you know, by planting, you know, bamboo and different construction initiatives for kind of reestablishing habitat. It's going to make it more more connective, more of a seamless operation where there's one management group instead of 50 management groups for these nature reserves. And all the orders will come from the top, basically working their way down, so that so that the people on the ground are all working towards a common goal, and basically interconnectivity of giant panda habitats, but also interconnectivity of giant panda habitat management. As well, creating a national entity will increase kind of the central government funding and spending. And the overall size of the Giant Panda National Park is basically, it's 3 times the size of Yellowstone, a little bit more, at 10,500 square miles. It's a pretty amazing undertaking, and definitely from visiting in 2019 as kind of pre 2020 and COVID pandemic, to visiting again in 2024 and this year in 2025. You know, I can see a change. There's new there's a lot of new initiatives, new construction, infrastructure upgrades, um, as well as different outreach that's starting to happen in some of these more far off places. So very positive, from a visitor, from the outside looking in, very positive kind of feeling going on as far as the Giant Panda National Park. So let's talk a little bit about the giant panda breeding and research bases. So we visit three of these on our trip, and what's so extraordinary about these is when we look at the kind of global captive giant panda population, we're looking at about 650 pandas in captivity, and many of them, the vast majority of them, except for, you know, kind of the pairs that end up either in the United States at some, like the San Diego Zoo had one. I think there was one at the in Washington D.C. for a while, a couple in Washington D.C. And basically all over the world in different facilities, there might be a pair of pandas that get sent over there. Um, there's over 650 in captivity, with 400 to 500 of them easily in Sichuan province in the various um, giant panda bases. And so what are they doing at these giant panda bases? Well, I want to give you just a quick history, which is, you know, in the 1970s and 1980s, when we're seeing kind of this rapid, appeared to be a rapid decline in giant panda population. There's kind of this urgency that was felt to not just, you know, try to protect giant pandas in the wild, but also to breed them in captivity, And to reach a goal, the initial goal was 300 pandas in captivity, so that they could protect the gene pool, protect the giant panda genetics, so that if everything failed with the goals of protecting wild spaces and keeping giant pandas alive in the wild, if everything failed in that regard, they would still have a viable breeding population, with enough genetic diversity to sustain the population into the future and potentially work on reintroduction efforts. So the breeding program, it took a long time, to really dial in giant panda breeding. You know, females only go into estrus for 12 to 36 hours per year, and if a male and a female are actually going to breed, well, those two giant pandas also need to jive, or they need to get along, they need to be familiar with each other, and connect. And it's just what they found on the road to, and it's I could do a whole other lecture just on giant panda breeding. Um, but basically, the general feeling was, they weren't really helping themselves, and the researchers weren't really doing a great job at first, kind of solidifying giant panda breeding systems. Nowadays, it's very good. They do a lot of natural breeding, where a male and female will breed together, and then they'll follow that up with artificial insemination just to make sure that everything worked. But the giant pandas still hold on to their mystique, with something called a pseudo pregnancy, where they will display and change and show all the signs of giving birth to cubs, or being pregnant, and then when it comes time to give birth to one or two cubs, they just won't have a cub, and that's a great mystery. Anyway, so very successful, to the point where they reached their 300 threshold quite a number of years ago, and today they're still breeding more pandas in captivity, um, to continue that program. But it's not just the breeding that's happening. There's also now reintroduction programs, and so these giant panda breeding and research bases, some of those pandas, as you may have noticed on the map, a lot of the populations of pandas are quite fragmented. So you could have a remote mountain region where you've got 5 or 10 pandas living in this one remote region, and you give them enough time, basically it's going to be very closely related pandas breeding with each other, kind of causing all kinds of kind of knock-on issues, with the interbreeding there. They're going to be breeding potentially with siblings or with family members over a period of time. Um, and that population of pandas is susceptible to disease and physical problems, and ultimately extirpation, or kind of fizzling out, because the genetics will not make it. And so, kind of as a to tie over those populations until there can be proper kind of interconnectivity between multiple fragmented habitats. If you're able to take a giant panda that has completely different genetics, or several giant pandas with completely different genetics bred in captivity, and put them into one of these isolated or fragmented populations, you basically kind of reinvigorate those genetics, mixing it up, so that that population can continue for much longer into the future. And so with the reintroduction programs, they're taking cubs, basically born, when they're the size of a stick of butter, from that age, basically feeding them, raising them, and keeping them with a wild caught mother, in very large semi-wild enclosures where they're actively, grazing on wild bamboo, and they have little to no human contact at all, because the end goal is, once that bear is old enough, graduates from the care of the mother, it will be transported and released into a fragmented habitat. So that's a big piece of the giant panda breeding and research bases. And yeah, as I mentioned, we're going to visit 3 of these on our trip. And what's really extraordinary, so I'll start with the bears that we see in captivity. They're not candidates for being released, but they're basically the face of this massive program, and an important step to connect not only the people of China, but travelers from around the world with these bears in the programs and everything that's happening at the giant panda bases. So they're really extraordinary. I say, when we go there, the 3 bases, we'll see probably around 100 pandas in total, which you cannot do anywhere else in the world. And so we may see, different family groups, maybe some mums and cubs, um, either young cubs or older cubs. Here's a little cub sitting on a log. Also, the enclosures are quite large, and they've got trees that the bears can climb, and pandas are climbers. Um, and so this is an adult bear that was napping up in a big tree and was kind of shuffling around. They're incredibly nimble up in the trees, even though they don't look like it. As well, the giant panda bases give us the opportunity to get up close and personal with them eating bamboo. And we've talked about, or you've probably heard about giant pandas and their affection and their love of bamboo. And it makes up about 99% of their diet, and they've got to eat 25 to 85 pounds of bamboo every single day just to break even, to make it all work for them. And so, kind of in these panda bases, we can kind of see the working of the pseudo thumb. We can see the crunching of the bamboo. The strongest kind of bite force of any of the bears up close and personal, in a really kind of intimate way, which is very special. Um, so something really, really great about giant pandas as well is they are flagship species. So when we look at this habitat that's been protected, and we think about giant pandas in general, they're one of the most recognized species um, across the planet. WWF has it as their logo because of that recognizable species, as well as them being a vulnerable species and a rare species that needs research and protection. Um, but they're a flagship species, and so when we think about when we think about the giant pandas and where they live, it's just like there's no doubt in our mind or in many people's minds that needs to be protected so we can keep those giant pandas in the wild. But as a flagship species, you're also sharing habitat with many, many others. And in particular, in places like the Sichuan giant panda sanctuaries or Wolong, there's thousands of species of plants, mosses, and lichens, many of which are endemic and found nowhere else in the world that could be erased if that habitat wasn't protected. So, they're basically representing um, this extremely endangered habitat with extremely endangered species. So they're easy to rally behind. There's not so many people that are going to rally behind a golden takin, but there's a lot of people that will rally and fundraise behind the giant panda. As well as a bear, giant pandas are keystone species. And so, on our expeditions, we're very unlikely to see a giant panda in the wild. They're shy, they're timid, and they're often kind of well away from roads and travel and anywhere where there's human activity. They find their wild spaces, their quiet places. However, when we look into the giant panda habitat and we look at the bamboo forests, we need to know that basically everything that's existing in that region is kept in check. The healthy ecosystem is kept in check by this keystone species. They eat the bamboo, they crunch it up, they drop it in different places, they disperse the seeds, they occasionally dig and shuffle and move. They're big animals, and so they're basically kind of in a way unknowingly kind of these nature farmers, um, being a bear. Um, and when pandas are lost from a habitat, that habitat is negatively affected because of that keystone species move. There are other species that will eat bamboo, but the giant pandas do it in a way that no other species do, and there's no one left. There's no animals left to kind of keep that bamboo in check and to disperse those seeds and to help keep a bamboo understory forest healthy. Now, together, both of those things, it makes these critters, the giant panda, an umbrella species. And so, as we've discussed, there's immense national and international support for giant pandas. Um, and as I mentioned before, you've got basically subtropical monsoon at the bottom of the valley to alpine habitat at the top. And because of that kind of range of habitats, um, you're looking at, 3,000-4,000 species of plants, as well as dozens of species of mammals. reptiles, hundreds of species of birds. Even within like one nature reserve of the giant panda, there's like 30 plus species of rhododendron. Like it's such a variety um, of everything in giant panda habitat. And so basically, by protecting the giant pandas, by kind of this global obsession and love for giant pandas, there's a lot of different species that live under the giant pandas umbrella. And I just like this example because it kind of describes, it just points at some of the other umbrella species where we protect one species and we end up protecting hundreds, if not thousands more. An example maybe a lot of you are familiar with in North America is salmon. You know, you protect the river system, you protect the salmon, you're providing food for birds, you're providing nutrients and fertilizer for the forest, and then when the coho salmon give lots of food for bears and birds and other animals, and then when those coho salmon go out to sea, they're also providing a fish or an animal that other species of fish will eat. So um, you protect the salmon, you protect everything that relies on the salmon. You protect the giant panda, you protect all that habitat that the giant panda needs to live, which then protects thousands of other species. So they're a pretty extraordinary umbrella species. Now, that's exactly basically what's happened in the giant panda nature reserves and the nature reserves that we visit. So, our first reserve that we go to is in the Minshan Mountains, and it's very well established. It was created in the 1970s. They have an extremely long-standing professional ranger patrol program where basically they're constantly doing circuits around to make sure that there's no giant pandas there's no people kind of coming in from the outside and trying to either poach giant pandas or harvest other animals. And what's ended up happening in this giant panda nature reserve is, yes, the bears were protected, but also inadvertently the golden takin were protected. Now there's only like 12,000 of these animals on the planet. You can see them pictured at the bottom there. Um, but the golden takin, this is a picture where you've got a couple of adults and lots of babies. They're the dark ones. It's a 1,000-pound animal, goat antelope that thrives in really mountainous regions. And for a very long time, it was an important, it was a food source for people living in these mountain regions. Um, but because of the nature reserve, they're very protected. So when we go to this place, we're very likely to see a lot of golden takin, more so than anywhere else that we visit on the trip. In fact, it's the only nature reserve where I've seen them um, on our trips, but we're likely to see plenty, which is really special. So other animals that share the same habitat, you've got your Tibetan macaque feeding on some fresh buds here, and sometimes they'll be quite close to the road. You can get some beautiful portraits of them. So you've got your Tibetan macaque, you've got all demographics. In the same habitat, you have things like the golden pheasant, um, as well as Temminck's tragopan and other kind of rare mountain-dwelling pheasants of all variety and color. Um, this is some of the habitat that is giant panda habitat. With the understory bamboo, you can see the giant, or basically the Chinese redbud blooming. Really beautiful, diverse spring forest, and also really beautiful colors if you decide to go in the fall. And the mountains and even the streams, the mountain streams there, we're very unlikely to see a giant salamander because of their nocturnal behaviors and love for burying themselves in the silt and deep rock, deep pools in the river. But that's another endangered species that has seen a rapid population decline that finds itself in these far-flung reaches of giant panda habitat. Just a really beautiful place. Here's a nice portrait of a golden takin here, or Sichuan takin. Other species in this park would be like Chinese goral, Chinese sorrel, Reeves muntjac, tufted deer, potentially, this is a Chinese goral, yellow-throated martin, uh, you know, hog-nosed badger, masked palm civet, flying squirrels. Like there's just such a wide variety of creatures that find themselves under the umbrella and under the protection of those giant pandas. Now, that's just one of the nature reserves we visit, and it is just a beautiful wilderness area. And basically we spend time just watching and looking to see what animals kind of come out of the forest. It's a park that's been very well managed, a reserve that's been very well managed and protected. And so after nearly 50 years, it's been a pretty it's been extremely successful as far as the animals coming to understand that they're not going to be chased, harassed, or hunted, and seeing them it doesn't come without its challenges as with all wildlife viewing, but seeing them is a possibility, which is not easy to say about a lot of places where animals have yeah, not easy to say about a lot of places with the forest and the place as dense as it is. Oh, and I forgot to mention moon bears are also in this habitat, and they have been sighted on NatHab trips as well. Um, Golden Snub-Nosed Monkey Nature Reserve. So this one here, it's where we're actually going is not part of Giant Panda Nature Reserve. It's not actually in a nature reserve. It's in one of the kind of fragmented gaps, because the road that we have to take to get in there, it's up kind of there is some farmland kind of at the bottom of this big glacially carved valley. Um, but when we get up there, we're kind of at the foothills or the base of a giant panda nature reserve. We look around at the mountaintops all around us, and we know that just on the other side of it, um, there's basically nature reserve there. And so it's not that giant pandas couldn't be there, but it is lacking some understory bamboo. We're a little bit low in elevation when we get here. Um, but what's going on is in this remote river valley, way deep into the mountains, there is a troop of research golden snub-nosed monkeys that basically researchers have semi-habituated to people. They bring them into this area, and we can go and watch them, and we can go and see them. Um, and it's a bit of a drive to get in there, a couple hours down a dirt road, and then a little bit of a walk uphill on a boardwalk, and we end up at this beautiful place, walking past like rhododendrons and all that kind of stuff. This beautiful place surrounded by forest, and there's this troop of semi-habituated golden snub-nosed monkeys. There's only 10 to 12,000 of these animals on the planet. Most of them, well, yeah, I think almost all of them are in China. Um, and it's just so special to see them. Of all the primates on the planet, these golden snub-nosed monkeys are best suited for cold environments, and they spend their winters in the mountains. Their main food source in the winter is lichen. They rely on the old growth forest that is often protected by giant panda nature reserves, and kind of a neat behavior with that, because they do spend a lot of time in the cold. They can last down to like minus 15 Fahrenheit, minus 25 Celsius, somewhere in that zone, pretty comfortably. Is they hug a lot. And so they really like to get close to each other. And if there's ever a stressful situation, they give each other a hug. One of the cool features is you can see kind of those longer golden guard hairs on their back, their orange faces, their orange kind of fur around their faces, but then their skin is actually blue. In particular, when you get up close into their faces, or especially around their eyes and their nose. But really, just here you can see the blue very well on the male there at the back with the long golden guard hairs. Here's another one with a little bit of the blue around the eyes. So on our expedition, yeah, we get ourselves up there, and then we get to spend the morning just hanging out with these golden snub-nosed monkeys. And what they decide to do, whether they're gonna stay up in the trees or come down kind of close to the creek where we're standing, is totally up to totally up to these golden snub-nosed monkeys, but there's no other place in the world where you can see and photograph these golden snub-nosed monkeys without basically trekking for days through extremely rugged mountainous terrain, as they do like their mountains. So that's super special. And then after that, we'll basically come out of the mountains for a brief moment um, and drive into another mountain range. So the first part of our trip was basically in the Minshan mountain range, and then we transition into the Chonglai mountain range. And the mountains that I'm showing you there, that's the Four Sisters Mountain. There's a legend basically that there's four sisters. The tallest one, the tip's just in the cloud. That is it's about 100 feet taller than was it Denali or Mount McKinley? It is 6,251 meters, something like that. It's just a little bit taller than the tallest mountain in North America, and that's just one of the mountains. Of course, when we get to the Himalayas and kind of the foothills to the Himalayas, you get into some pretty big terrain. So it's this part of the trip to get there. We're going to drive basically tunnels and tunnels and tunnels into the heart of Wolong Nature Reserve. The Wolong Nature Reserve, the only way to get up into giant panda habitat is basically just switchback mountain stairs. And to spend any amount of time up there, you really need to go with a ranger and be camping and all that kind of stuff. It's not easy to access. However, in the heart of Wolong Nature Reserve is also where the Wolong Shenshuping giant panda base is. So it's really cool to kind of be at this panda base, which is the original one was destroyed in 2008 in an earthquake. A landslide came down, knocked some walls over. Pandas and people lost their lives. It was very tragic, and they rebuilt it in a more stable valley some miles away. But when you look at the mountaintops around, you're looking at pandas in captivity, but you're also, in giant panda habitat, essentially looking up into those mountains. It's very cool. So we have to do that to get here to Four Sisters Mountain National Park. And we'll drive a ways, and we'll be right in the heart of this really cool reserve. And even on that road, that drive, I've come across, I've very rarely and very luckily once we saw a red panda on the side of the road, but it's not impossible. It just depends on the traffic construction if there's anything going on. But that's not our main focus in this section, but also seeing rhesus macaques in the heart of that reserve along the road as we drive through. And then as we start to get up into higher alpine, we get into, we've seen a badger up top. It was like a Eurasian badger, as well as some very rare pheasants, including the Chinese monal, which is like a huge kind of birders list item to get as the Chinese monal, and the red-eared pheasant or something like that too. Lots of pheasants in China. Anyways, really beautiful drive just to get here. Driving all the way through the heart of giant panda habitat, and I just want to show you this picture. This is an example. So this is kind of shooting down. It's a picture that's shooting down the main valley of Wolong. And if you can imagine, down at the bottom of those mountains is where the road kind of weaves its way along where the river goes. And then the giant panda habitat is all the forested hilltops that we can see with a big mountain in the distance. Absolutely breathtaking scenery. This is just, again, on the drive to get there. If we have clear skies, we'll make some stops and get some photos up here. I think this quick photo stop was at about 14,000 feet. So give you an idea of the height of those mountains. Very possible that what we're looking at here with these snow-covered mountains in the heart of Wolong Nature Reserve as well, and the Sichuan giant panda sanctuaries, this could also be a place where there might be snow leopards living. Probably won't see one at this distance, but just kind of gives you that feeling of the remoteness and the wildness of the habitat that we're going through. This one here is within Four Sisters Mountain National Park, and you have basically a landslide created lake where it would have basically stopped and slowed the water and killed a few trees that were sitting there. It's nicknamed the Alps of the East because of the striking and dramatic mountain range that we spend our day in. And then, of course, up in altitude, we're now looking at basically domesticated yak habitat. So it's a Tibetan region. There's some yak herding going on and that kind of stuff. But they're really neat critters to get a few pictures of and to just watch kind of as they graze. A big part of the culture in that area. Just beautiful, rugged mountains. As well, I want to point out the forest up in this area. We're talking about like basically a larch and coniferous forest, larch and redwood forest, which is extremely rare. Much of this type of forest outside of this area had already been logged and cut for the big, tall, straight trees and timber. Prior to the 1970s, when kind of a lot of the giant panda nature reserves were being put together. So it's really special to get to see this environment for sure. And then finally, as we leave our Four Sisters Mountain National Park, we have to do an extraordinary drive through a whole bunch more giant panda habitat to make our way to what I basically call kind of our Red Panda Nature Reserve. Um, we'll take kind of a back road and up over some more beautiful mountain passes, more opportunity for some of those higher altitude pheasants. If pheasants aren't your thing, that's okay. But in China, they're almost always extremely colorful and pretty wild looking. It's just gorgeous, that whole drive. And then when we get to the nature reserve, we get to spend some time basically looking for red pandas, where seeing a red panda in the wild is the main goal. The valleys and the area that we're going through is beautiful giant panda habitat with plentiful understory bamboo, lots of mountain streams. It's like everything. If you were to just go and read giant panda habitat, this place is giant panda habitat. And of course, it makes sense that sharing that habitat, you're going to have red pandas. So while giant pandas remain elusive, the red pandas seem to, in this area, and it's not always a guarantee, but it's certainly well known in this area that the red pandas seem to have a bit of a kind of nonchalance around people and will spend time sleeping and resting in trees that are 100 feet or so from areas that we can walk, and so that's really special. They seem to just ignore us just fine. But this is kind of your perfect habitat here. You've got kind of the small trees, places for red pandas to climb and move about, as well as the understory bamboo. Here's another look kind of at this habitat. There's actually a gondola that takes you up to the very top of a mountain, or close to the very top of the mountain, where you can kind of survey and look down over the many kind of valleys and zones within this nature reserve. And folks, with enough searching and luck, we also can come across red pandas here. And red pandas are another animal that's endangered. Again, there's somewhere around 10,000 red pandas left on the planet. And to have a place that we can go and spend some time and have very good odds of seeing a red panda in the wild is pretty darn spectacular, and such a magnificent addition to this trip. And so what a way to finish an expedition through these giant panda nature reserves, through the giant panda bases, to finish by sighting maybe not the giant panda in the wild, but the lesser panda or red panda. So here's some photos from the spring. This one here, it was the first red panda that I came across this year, and it was sleeping on a branch in front of a blooming rhododendron bush, which was super cool. And then this one here was having a nap and a look around. You can see how kind of spending time in the tree, when we talk about the different habitat, giant pandas sit right on the ground and eat the bamboo, whereas the red pandas kind of, if they're going to eat the bamboo, they're usually going for the tops, and they'll basically sit in the trees and reach down and grab the tops of the bamboo. So this one here was having a look. This one was kind of having a scratch and just woke up from a nap, and you can really kind of see that in the face there. It looks a little disheveled. And then to cap it off, this is one of my favorite red panda moments. It's just amazing how the red panda like blends so well into the forest and into the bush, basically with the big kind of mossy tree branches sitting over top of this bamboo forest. So a really spectacular expedition, a really spectacular trip, and with that, folks, in conclusion, I just want to say that if you're looking to go and experience and immerse yourself in giant panda habitat, if you want to go and see one of the most one of the most protected and um, I guess best supported conservation initiatives on the planet, that like our adventure, this expedition is just something absolutely extraordinary um, to experience. You know, if it's not the panda bases, it's the nature reserves. If it's not the nature reserves, it's the endemic wildlife, the endangered species, the birds, the food, the people, everything about this expedition. It is full. It is such a full experience when visiting a place, and I can't wait to go back again. I already know I've got a trip next spring, so um, I look forward to this adventure. I'm just putting
Wow,
words
Eddie.
in.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, you go for it. Oh my gosh. I mean, as we were talking before we started the webinar, this has already been a destination I want to go to. And now, oh my gosh. I hope to join you in the field one day. And it sounds like a lot of people in the chat do as well. So everybody, speaking of, in that little chat box, a little question mark, we have some time for Q&A with Eddie here, and we will see how many we can get through before the top of the hour. We have lots of really good questions coming in. So I would like to start with a conservation one, Eddie, and that is if we're thinking about the future of these nature reserves, has there been any talk about creating true conservation corridors and connecting all of them? And if so, how would local communities be impacted?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's all kind of that's part of what the Giant Panda National Park is trying to accomplish. Is basically that interconnectivity and those wildlife corridors and movement. There's a great example that I often refer to from the Chinling Mountains, where so if you look at giant pandas and their behavior and how they like to they basically avoid vehicles. And if there's kind of a two-lane road going through a wilderness area, giant pandas are unlikely to be within about a mile and a half or so of that noise. They don't like the road noise. They don't like the sound of people and that kind of stuff. So that's immediately your buffer zone, kind of, let's just say 2 miles on each side of a road. In the Chinling Mountains, there was this one area where basically there was a road. It was this one road that had to go up and over. There weren't people living up there. It was just this road that basically connected two valleys, but it had to go up and over and around. And just its existence and the traffic that went on it was fragmenting the habitat. Um, it basically prevented pandas from crossing over with any regular interval, as well as other animals tried to avoid this. But there was a 1 kilometer tunnel that was built that eliminated approximately 8 miles of road. So 3/4 of a mile tunnel eliminated eliminated 8 miles of road. And then when they took the road out and decommissioned it, they then replanted it, kind of seeded more bamboo and some of the native tree species. And over the period of some years, it reconnected two habitats that had been fragmented. So it was like one population of like 100 uh, pandas and then another one of like 25, but they put them together so that they could freely move over there. And all it took was one tunnel. Um, we have stuff like that in North America when it comes to like wildlife overpasses and underpasses in some of our major national parks. And I think that in particular, tunnels and eliminating all these windy roads and fragmenting valleys is a huge part of the initiative under the Giant Panda National Park. Additionally, when it comes to, a lot of these habitats, there's people already living. And but what from discussions that I had while I was there, it seems as though um, China is trying to put a lot of emphasis on training people in tourism, training people in um, in kind of ranger programs, and to try to basically create more jobs for people in these remote regions, that are otherwise mostly, farmers, um, uh, uh, basically, yeah, just kind of these kind of deep into the mountain kind of farming practices. There's some mining, but not a whole lot. And so they're just trying to kind of create more jobs that are um, not as harmful to the environment, or clearing land so that you can have some terrace farmland going up the side of the mountain, but instead saying like, no, you don't need to farm. Why don't you get this job over here at the parks, or the Giant Panda National Park headquarters, whether it be, working as a ranger, maintenance, everything that comes with an operation like that, and providing those opportunities to people, and then removing the farms and then replanting them, and expanding giant panda habitat.
Fantastic. That was a great deep dive. I super appreciate that answer. And hopefully those asking a little bit more about the conservation do as well. I do have a lot of questions about the trip itself, Eddie, if you wouldn't mind diving into those a little bit. Could you talk about it? How many days is the itinerary? What are the general dates? And maybe how do they differ? And then lastly, what are the physical requirements that somebody should be thinking about to do a trip like this?
Sure. So to start off with, the dates, we're talking about, there's spring and fall departures. Um, and the spring departures, usually coincide with um, some of the wildflowers, some of those blooming trees like the Chinese redbud or rhododendrons. And in the fall, you're looking at kind of fall colors as far as the foliage. Wildlife and is about equal for both of those. It just depends on kind of your preference. There's two different trips. Basically there's I believe it's a 12-day, um, it's a 12-day nature journey, and then there's a 14-day photo expedition. Um, and yeah, the nature journey is going to be extremely focused on this giant panda habitat, and with like-minded travelers looking to do that deep dive into giant panda conservation and all that kind of stuff. And then the photo expedition is going to be that, plus an additional couple of days. I think I actually can't remember exactly what's on the itinerary for 2026, so you may have to reference that if a photo expedition, or talk to your adventure concierge if a photo expedition is the name of the game for you. But basically, it is that deep dive into all the places that we talked about, with a heavy emphasis on photography, maybe spending a little bit more time, or a lot more time talking about cameras and how to capture the best shots and make sure that we're maximizing our experience, um, uh, from a photography perspective, in the same places. Um, yes, and then physical requirements. So this trip, there is, there's definitely going to be a lot of walking. Um, I'm thinking to really kind of maximize. It's going to be walking kind of uphill, downhill. There'll be some trails that are uneven terrain. There's going to be lots of stairs. Some of the hotels, uh, you know, most hotels have elevators. Some might not, but if they don't, we try to get onto the bottom floor, at least just the second floor. Um, and yeah, I mean, it's something that you're going to be. The days are long. We're usually, up and moving sometimes as early as 6:30. Um, Sometimes having breakfast, after we've already done something in the morning. Um, and then usually we're wrapping up the day by 8 or 9 o'clock, after dinner, and then we do it all over again. And at this point, the itinerary, we stay kind of 2 nights in each location and then move. So we do have a moment to kind of catch our breath, get settled, immerse ourselves for the day, travel, and then kind of keep doing that throughout the trip.
Wonderful. And if anybody else has any additional questions, our adventure specialist team are amazing, and some of them have even been on this trip and would be more than happy to help answer any additional questions. And of course, if you're already booked, our adventure concierge team would be happy to help as well. So the whole office is here for you if you're looking into the trip or if you're already booked on the trip. And then we have these great webinars with like Eddie and the whole China team to help get you all prepared before you go and learn about this great destination. So, Eddie, we have reached the top of the hour, which is crazy. That flew by. And so I would love to turn it to you for any last closing comments.
Sure, thank you. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Um, if you want to see some pictures from my recent adventures, you can find me on Facebook there, Eddy Savage / The Wilderness Gallery, on Instagram, Eddy Savage Photo. I've been pretty busy, so I'm just starting to post pictures from my last expedition to China. And if you like bears, I wrote a book called Wild Bears of Canada. Otherwise, folks, this trip is just one of the most extraordinary nature journeys in a place that is often overlooked for its natural value. You know, when a lot of people think about traveling to China, they think about Beijing, Shanghai, Xi'an, the big cities, you know, high-speed trains, all that kind of stuff. But this is a real immersion into a place less traveled with an extraordinary team to see some extraordinary things. So thank you very much, and maybe I'll see you out there.
Absolutely, Eddie. Thank you so much for taking the time to present to us today. And I would like to thank everybody who tuned in. Join us tomorrow for our next daily dose of nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I will conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody.